مرحبا بكم أعزائي المستمعين في حلقة جديدة من بودكاست النادي. وفي هذه الحلقة سيكون لدينا ضيف مميز هو سقراطيس. Welcome Sokratis to Alnadi podcast. It's really great to have you with us here.
Thank you so much. It is an honor for me to be here.
Thanks for your time. It's really great to have your experiences, thoughts, and insights about the music and share the journey. Let's start by a brief biography, Master.
So I was born in Athens, Greece, in 1974, and I lived the normal life of any other kid of my, generation, I guess. But at the same time, I had my parents. Both even though they were not musicians themselves, they were very interested in educating their kids, me and my sister, the better way they could in any aspect, and in music, of course. And I guess I was lucky because they were advised from a man who knew where to tell them to orient their kids. So, I had the European music education in the conservatory in my neighborhood, like any other kid. I was playing the guitar, but at the same time, I was learning the local traditions here, the Byzantine music theory and the chanting, singing, and the Greek folk music, singing firstly. So in other words, I was part of a children choir, which at that time, it was not that common to have choirs of children or any choir working on the local music. At the time, the local musics existed, the traditions, only in the villages, and in the towns, there was nothing like that. And of course, since then, many things have changed here in Greece, and we can talk later about that. So I was lucky since, until my 12, 13 year of age, I had in my ears lots of the repertoire and lots of music and of modal music. We call them the modes, ichos, which means makam or sound. It's very close as a terminology.
Yes.
At my 14, there was something that changed my life happened. I heard in a concert a man who was meant to be my teacher and my mentor. And that man was Ross Daly, strangely an Irish guy who lived in Greece at the time, and he was playing several instruments, and he was also playing the lira, the Cretan type of the lira, a fiddle with 3 strings, which is very common in our area. And I think I liked the music, I liked the instrument, but basically more I liked himself, because he was not the musician I was used to watch. He was not the old-fashioned folk musician, clarinet player or violin player who were very formal, in a way, especially when they were playing in concerts. So I met Ross Daly. I asked for lessons from him. I picked up the lira almost by accident. I ordered a lira in an instrument maker, and it was the time that he was experimenting on the type of the lira which was found and is still played mainly in Istanbul. So I went to Ross with a classic kemençe in my hands. This is the Turkish terminology, or the politiki lira, as we call it, which means the lira of Istanbul. I asked for lessons, and since the start, all the sounds I had in my ears since I was a kid just very fluently came on the instrument, together with the technique that I had from the guitar and the knowledge. It was very easy for me after playing polyphonic music to read monophonic, scores like semis and folk music. So it was really, really fast. And I remember maybe after a year, my teacher, my mentor, Ross Daly, asked me to join his group, and I started playing live since I was 15 years old.
Wow.
Of course, as I told you before, it was a different period. It was like a desert here in Greece. There were not many musicians playing this, especially, for example, this instrument. I was the only one to play it. So I was very lucky because everybody would ask me to join because it was very interesting for the music circles at that time in Greece to have a kid who is playing this instrument, which was not known at all at the time. So because of that, I was very lucky, and I really played in many groups in a big variety of styles, musical styles. With my mentor Ross Daly, we played what he's doing. I mean, his compositions based on the music of the Eastern Mediterranean. But still, at the same time, I was playing with Greek folk groups and Greek folk singers, really going deep into the repertoire of the Greece. I was playing Turkish Ottoman classical music in another group with a ney player and a kanun player. I was playing Balkan music, even experimental stuff like jazz with ethnic jazz groups. So even with classical musicians, I was really, now that I mentioned all of this, it feels too much, but that was the truth. I was really it was very easy for me to move from one style to the other, and I really wanted to learn more and more and more. And actually, this is what I still do. I mean, I play and I cooperate with musicians that they break the borders, you know. And since then, I have worked and played with many musicians from folk traditions, Greeks, Turks, Bulgarians, Arabs from Egypt, from Syria, and many other places. And of course, musicians from Europe and classical musicians or experimental musicians. And as at the last turn of that story, I talk about the last 6-7 years, I recorded I hate the word my, but anyway, compositions that I worked on for all these years, and I felt I am at the right time to publish them. So I created a quartet which looks like a jazz quartet, but it's based on the lira, so it's this which has a really strong personality. And we are very lucky to record for the German record company ECM Records. You have recorded 2 albums there, and but I still record with other musicians, like my brother, my friend Derya Turkan in Turkey, who plays the same instrument. We have 2 albums already recorded, and we wait for a third one, a duo album, to arrive soon. Well, I guess that's the story.
It's a very rich story. I would like to go back to the time when you started with the music. How did it start? Was it an official way of learning, like a standard way for the guitar, for the Western music, polyphonic, and for the folk? How was it? How was the time spent?
Well, it was both. The guitar was a typical conservatory lesson, meaning starting from learning the notes and then having the exercises and the repertoire. It was the typical work like almost anywhere on earth, I guess.
Yes.
It was with reading notes too. In the choir, it was according to the oral tradition. I mean, the teacher would sing a part and then you would follow, imitate the melody. But at the same time, we used the Byzantine notation, which is a very special notation uh, on its own, and it is developed since the 10th century, which is more for the hymns. So it's strange if you start notating folk music, but we used it for something more complicated.
Yes.
So in other words, I feel very good about that, because I had both the ways of learning, both the reading and the listening at the same time.
Great. And when you say the teacher, is it in a school or the church, or what kind of for the choir?
The choir was in a special school, which was not at all public. It was a private school, which was that a crazy musician who had really a vision about all this music had started that time.
Wow. Maybe shed some light on the objectives of such a school. Why did he do this?
I mean, he just felt that there was a need. Actually, he was a teacher in a private school. The teacher was owned by his father, so he loved music himself. So he had kids too at the same time, and a place to work. So I think he just did what he was really
great.
He wanted to do. Yeah.
Yes. One more point in the story you mentioned, Sokratis, which is the circles, music circles. Can you describe these music circles at that time compared to today's? Because they were of very rich experience, I think.
Yes, and it's a very interesting topic, this one that you mentioned, because if you look at the music circles in Greece nowadays, especially the music circles connected with the modal music, the local music, or the Oriental music, which of course is very connected. Greece was always connected with the eastern part of Mediterranean, at least, even further, Middle East, even further, even Iran. So if you look today, the scene is very rich of musicians of ages between 20 and 40. And I guess very few people can imagine, if you don't know the story, that 30 years ago, when I started playing this instrument, it was Ross Daly on the one hand, it was himself, with almost amateur musicians playing with him at the time. And there was another pole on the other side where my choir teacher was involved, and his brother, who was the guy who played the oud again after the old generation. In other words, nowadays in Greece you find people playing very well instruments that are common in the East, like the oud, the kanun, even the ney. But that was not, Greece was never connected actually with these instruments, but only the Greeks who lived in the East were connected with these instruments. So after the exchange of the populations between the Greece and Turkey at the beginning of the 20th century, 1922, many people arrived from Turkey and enriched the music scene of Greece. But still, most of them were amateur musicians, or they had really a hard time moving. So there was no place for them to play their music. So they left their instruments and did something else to survive. And it's only after 1980s, even 1990s, that young people picked up the music from where all these old refugees had left it. And of course, enriched their knowledge by listening to musicians from Turkey, from the Arab world, even from Iran, from India, from the Balkans, and of course, learning about recordings of Greeks who had made the recordings, especially in Istanbul. For example, the instrument I play, it was mostly played by Greeks until 1900s in Istanbul, and it was then that almost the first Turk who played that instrument was a very, exceptional and talented musician, Tamborit Cemil Bey, and it was after him that the instrument entered the classical music of Istanbul too.
Yes.
People played it in the classical music too.
So you were immersed in these circles after joining Rose on the lira, and then you were pulled from one circle to another, or because you were playing with Rose and you were playing some other kinds of music, you told me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just mentioned the two circles who really connected with Oriental music.
Yes.
But of course, there were many circles of musicians and groups playing folk music, Greek folk music, where the basic band is clarinet, violin, darabuka, and the Greek lute, which is like a guitar.
Yeah.
It's the shape of a lute, but it is playing chords. So I entered in these groups too, and because there was a clarinet and a violin always, and they play so many things together, there was no place for my poor lira in there. And I guess this is one of the reasons that while practicing the lira, I also practiced the lute from Istanbul, which is called lafta by the Turks, and it's more like a oud with frets, something between the oud and the lute.
Yeah.
And actually, I have played more lute in my life during that period in these groups, where sometimes it was not concerts always. Sometimes it was playing for people to dance. So it was really tough, and with the lute, I felt more safe to accompany the band.
Interesting. Let's stop at the point where a musician child, is learning the guitar and the Byzantine music at the same time. So how can we distinguish and observe these two kinds of musics at the same time for a child? Unusual child, let's say.
To be honest,
Yeah.
at that time, guitar was, even though I asked for the guitar to go to learn it, but at the age of 10, 12, even everything seems like a school lesson that you don't want to go to. So the guitar, I went to the conservatory. I don't remember being that fond of this, or I never thought that I would become a musician at that time. Byzantine music, on the other hand, felt like something completely different. And another characteristic of that period was the isolation of the circles. So the classical musicians would speak with, they wouldn't care what the folk or Oriental musicians or the Byzantine circle would do. And every circle was really isolated. And it felt like I had to choose where I belong. So, you know what I did? After I started playing with Rose, I started playing the lira, and I threw away the guitar because I had to choose. It was something that I regret. And later on, at my 20, 25, I really thought, if I could go back, I would continue with the guitar. But anyway, it gave me all the basics I needed for my fingers and my mind, to move together in the music.
But at the theory level, never been a confusion because they are totally different.
They are different, but at that time, I mean, I didn't really. Maybe I didn't even understand what was going on. I was just listening to the music. Later on, where I really studied, of course, I realized the differences in terms not only of intervals, but also of music expression, etc., and aesthetics. But much later, I mean, recently, I realized that maybe they are not that different, or they cannot be different in terms of a bigger picture, you know?
Yeah, we will come to that for sure.
Yes.
So maybe it's a good idea to leave aside all the complexities and the complications we take into looking into the music. Like when we listen to it, it's like a river is flooding into ourselves. We enjoy it, we go deep into the music rather than seeing it with always, rulers and, all these kind of complications of theory all the time. It can be sometime, but not all the time. Maybe this is a
This
lesson we
is
learn from such an experience.
absolutely, yes. This is very, very correct. Yes, and
Yes.
usually, the theory and the overdoing with theory and the analysis of the music, I think the result is it's all about learning, of course, but I guess we'll also lose lots of the
Beautiful.
energy and the
Yes.
feeling that music has to give us. Yeah.
And we see now a very different jump from a very public and a very popular instrument, guitar, to non-popular instruments, which is politic lira and laughter.
Yes,
It's
it's true.
totally a different direction now.
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
An interesting aspect is that, as I mentioned, I was the first to play the political lira, but the lira as an instrument was at that time and still is very popular. And I mean, I was bored of people that I met, taxi drivers or people that came to me. And when I said that, when I mentioned that I play the lira, they would ask, so you are from Crete, right? And I would say, no, I'm not from Crete. And then they would ask, so you are from Pontus. Pontic lira, which is the lira of North Turkey, which is in Turkey it's the Karadeniz kemençe, is very, very common in Greece, again because of the exchange of the population.
Yes.
So these two types of lira are very, very common in Greece. So as an instrument, is very recognizable. And now it's very interesting because 30 years ago, I was almost the only one to play this instrument in a professional level. And now I welcome in the university where I teach
Yes.
musicians that feel like my grand kids, because they are students of my students. So I'm not that old, but
Yes.
in music, the generations could be 5 or 10 years.
Yes.
So, but it's very. I feel actually. I think I feel more that I have fulfilled my dreams with this, equally with playing music. I feel it's very important that people. I feel I put a little, rock on the wall of the music
Yes.
scene of Athens and Greece.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful. Let's just mention some characteristics or features of these two instruments that you picked, the lira and the laughter, and the music itself for these instruments.
Yes, very nice. These two instruments worked as a couple, as a duet, and they played together folk music, but urban folk music in the tavernas of Istanbul. And I don't know if it had to do with alcohol, because these tavernas were the meyhanes, they were serving alcohol, but most of the musicians were non-Muslims. So meaning there were rooms, there were most of the rooms, I mean, Greek-speaking people,
Yes.
we call them Greeks now.
Yes.
So and they are known with their first names, like the lira player Nikolaki or Vasilaki, or Antonis, the lute player. And all these musicians lived at the peak of these traditions of the tavernas, which was from 1850 to 1920. And unfortunately, there is no recording of that style of music. What we know for this period is from recordings that came later on from their kids and their grandkids that lived in Istanbul. A couple of them came in Athens too, like Lambros Leondaridis, who was a lira player. He was the only lira player who came from Istanbul in Athens. That was before, of course, I picked up the instrument, right? But I didn't have the chance to meet him. So he died before I was born. So these two instruments were really playing together. It's very interesting because if you go to Crete nowadays, these two instruments, the Cretan lyra and the Cretan lute, they still play together as a duo. So it feels like it was an old duo of the old times that survived in several other regions. There are also duets with the same instruments in other islands of the Dodecanese, like Kassos and Karpathos in the Aegean, etc., etc. So, I mean, it was a difficult time, I guess, for politics too, and for people, and especially for places that had multicultural environment, like Istanbul, because it was the time of the break of the old empires and the creation of the nation-based states of the 19th century. But it's a fact that all this tradition declined. The tavernas were closed, or people went away. And I think it is because of Tamburice Milbey that at least one of these two instruments, the lira, the classique mentioned, survived in the new environment of the modern Turkish state, in the radio, in the Turkish radio, where they started creating this, what we know as the classical Turkish music of the 20th century. So Tamburice Milbey had students, and so I think it is because of him, and also because there was a place for the lira. Like I mentioned before, there was no place for the lira in the folk Greek band.
Yes.
In the Ottoman Turkish classical or semi-classical orchestra, there was a place because there was violin, but there was no clarinet. And there was the bowed instrument, the rebab, which was very common in the palace, in the classical Ottoman tradition. It was declining too. So there was not an important figure to bring this instrument to the new era. So the lira survived, and since then, in Turkey, in Istanbul actually, people, not many people, very few people. I mean, a couple of students of Tamburice Milbey, and then again a couple of students of them. At the same time, the Greeks have stayed there, like Alekos Badzanos, who still played in tavernas and in the music circles of Istanbul. Who was, by the way, the brother of Yorgo Badzanos, who is also a figure, a nude player of Istanbul, of the same families of musicians,
Yes.
So the lira has arrived until today. That is now, it's a good period, I guess, because now both in Turkey and now in Greece too, people learn this instrument. We are not many again, but still there is an interest and people play. Now, the lafta, the lute from Istanbul, this is an interesting story because nobody knows what people played on that instrument. What we know is coming from two recordings of Tamburice Milbey again, who was playing everything, who is playing the laughter in a virtuosic way, something between a tambour and an oud. And actually, the two instruments I named, I think, are the reason that laughter didn't survive, because there was no place for the laughter in the new orchestra. Tambour was there, the oud was there already, so there was no role for the laughter, and it was an instrument that dropped into a known a period that nobody played it, of a couple of decades after 1930s, and it is very recent. It's a very recent story that people started to play this instrument again, both in Turkey and in Greece. And but still, it's very interesting. I don't know a single musician that states himself as a laughter player. Many people play the laughter, like I do, right? In Greece and Turkey, but I don't know one single musician that he considers himself a laughter player. I mean, you can find a lute player who plays the laughter. Here in Greece, many bouzouki players play the laughter, or I play the lira and the laughter. So it's interesting.
Why is that?
It's, well, it's, I don't know, but it's, as an instrument, it never arrived to, I don't know, it was always an accompaniment instrument, maybe. It's interesting. But no matter what, people are playing really in a very high level of technique nowadays on this instrument. Especially the bouzouki players I know, because they really come from a tradition, virtuosic tradition. They really play very difficult things on the laughter.
And we do have the repertoire for the laughter and lira from the Ottoman music or the other repertoire today, like Lavtaji Andun and
yes.
Yep.
We don't have the folk repertoire, unfortunately, but we know it from other instruments or from the oral tradition from musicians from that time. I talk about dances like the Kasapiko, Kasap, or dances on 9/8, etc. The other repertoire is the common repertoire for any other instrument, which is the old Ottoman and modern Turkish repertoire. And also these musicians composed forms, classical forms of the semai, and songs in Turkish, of course. So especially Anton is the lute player, Lavtaji Anton, has left some very nice compositions, and also the Kemençeci Nikolaki, the lira player Nikolaki.
Yes,
they also composed, and Vasilaki too.
Yeah, great. And maybe the drop of some decades for the laughter were picked up by the explanation that you shared, where maybe they were not naming themselves like laughter players, but they existed. Otherwise, maybe the whole new style of playing is an innovation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's a strange instrument. Nobody knows exactly what to do with this instrument. So the oud player will make the laughter sound like an oud, the saz player like a saz, the bouzouki player like a bouzouki. This is what I like about the laughter, because there's not a special style that you have to follow, because the tradition was broken in a way. And for sure, we are not sure whether Tamburice Milbey was playing following the tradition of the old musicians, or he was doing his own stuff on the instrument.
Yes,
which possible. I guess this is the most probable. Yeah.
Maybe we need to stop and discuss the anecdote of Labyrinth and Rose Daly. Let's share some of the memories, experiences, your contributions and participation.
So, as I told you, I started playing with, at that time, there was the group called Labyrinth, the music group.
Yes.
it's like a dream when I go back to that memories. I'm very grateful to himself, to Ross Daly, that because he was so open-handed to me, and he was giving me the chances to become a better musician. And even though now I know that I was not at all ready to follow the group, I was there next to him, and he told me that this is the way that you have to learn the music on stage. I have nothing else to tell you, privately. You go on and move. And I remember some very, very exceptional musicians I met and played with in this group. One of them is a clarinet player, a Greek clarinet player, Vasilis Soukas, who passed away many years ago. And I remember we were at a concert. I was 16, 17 years old, a kid playing music. And he was a star already. I mean, everybody knew him. And it was clarinet and lira. And because we were trying to do it better, we didn't play random the octaves. We had organized the octaves to make the music sound better because it was a big orchestra.
Yeah.
But that was live on stage in the bigger theater of Athens, on stage, and there is a melody. I got enthusiastic. I should have dropped to the low octave, but I continued at the high octave, where it was his part to go to the high octave. And any other musician of his generation would have played 3 times louder and killed the little, sorry for the word, anyway, the little, kid that dared to take his phrase. Vasilis Soukas, 1, 2, at the third note that he realized that we played unison, that he realized that I'm going on, he dropped down to the octave and just started accompanying me at the low octave.
Wow.
So I feel so happy and so I cannot find the word, but I met musicians that really taught me how not only music but musicianship should be, and that was something very, very special in that group. And of course, many, many other stories with musicians. And I had also my first trips abroad in Europe, and the first memories of playing music. And that was a big school for me. That was my music school.
And in that school, you taught also.
Yes, right. Later on, later on, we had different paths. At some point, my path led me to away from the Labyrinth music group. At the same time, Ross moved in Crete and started building the school of Labyrinth, the real school, where he invited me to teach, and I taught from the beginning there. It's been how many years now? Almost 20 years. That starting from zero, starting from scratch, as we say, we were sleeping. There was no proper place to sleep. In the wine, how do you say, in the basement, for example, to support Labyrinth. And it's great that since then, of course, it has gone through many difficulties of economic, basically, but it's very good that now he has arrived at the place where people from all around the world visit Crete or visit the online courses, which is the way we do it recently.
Yeah, great. Sokratis, you are an associate professor at the University of Macedonia. Let's discuss what you do in the university, or maybe start with your studies before joining the university.
My studies, went through the typical musicology studies in Athens, because at the time I was studying, there was not an academy of music as a university. The department I teach is 15 years old, and it was created to cover that inexistence of a music academy. It is based in Thessaloniki, in northern Greece, and there are different directions of studies: the European music, Byzantine music, contemporary music, and folk music. This is where I teach.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not all about Greek folk music. We place Greek folk music in as a small part of a bigger mosaic. So what I teach there, I teach both my instruments, where I have very few students, of course. Every year I may have one or two. This is
They are lucky.
Normal, yes. But then I really love to teach other group lessons, like improvisation, rhythmic improvisation, and of course modality, where I also teach makams, and I combine makams with the local theoretical theory of the Byzantine modes, or any other music theory.
And I know that you do some research too.
Yes, and it's been 14 years now that I teach this. Actually, this is my favorite lesson. It's modality in Eastern Mediterranean, which recently I renamed it the Big Bang Theory in music.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, after working with students 14 years, and it's not only these 14 years, I used to teach almost since I started playing music. I was teaching at the same time, because as I told you, nobody else was there. So anyway, so after all this experience, I realized some things about what is important and what is not. And I also met people that had really a very hard time to learn the basics of the system. And for people that may know the system of even the system of the makams as we know it today in any tradition of the Arabic world, or the Turkish version, or the old Ottoman, or even the Byzantine modes.
Yes,
it's complicated. It looks complicated. It feels complicated. It is complicated, and I still try to find a way to make things easier. I think I have come up to something which I hope I will be able to write it down soon and share it.
I love it, really. We will come to discuss it, but before we go to that point, I'd like you to compare to me the types of teaching, the types of nurturing of a musician in the university versus the workshops versus maybe one-to-one teaching. How do you see the effectiveness of these approaches, and what's your perspective on these?
Yes. So in the university, when it is an instrument lesson, it's one-to-one lesson, like anywhere else. That's the only way it can work. Of course, sometimes small groups may have interesting results, because it's not only the teacher and the student, but the students between them, they can exchange things and one can see the other. So I'm not negative to a small group. I have done it with two students, actually. The thing that is I think the most interesting thing in the university is that, because it is a new university, and actually music studies of folk music or folk-based music in Greece, it's a very recent thing. We are very late, actually, and this is very, very bad. But we have one little advantage. that we can see what other people did around us and see what they did good and what they did wrong. So, for example, in Bulgaria, there is a big and long and very interesting tradition of folk music teaching, like in Turkey too. And in both cases, what it feels like they didn't avoid to have, as a result, homogeneous musicians. In other words, they didn't avoid to have what, for example, in European music, I think went wrong. It's they put the instrument in front of the people, meaning the instrument is more important than the personality of the musician. In other words, in folk music, you don't talk about the violin and the clarinet, but you talk about, I don't know the name, Hassan, the clarinet, and Yanis, the violin player, or Ibrahim, the oud player. Yeah. So, because the good musicians, it's all about saying your own story, and also the repertoire is not that complicated. I mean, even, for example, Yorgos Bagianos, that we mentioned before, he's considered the best oud player ever. And people say that his technique was really strange. He was playing his left hand in terms of right. He didn't hold the instrument properly. His thumb was too over the instrument. He was playing bass with his thumb, but he was doing it. I guess that if Yorgos Bagianos had gone through the Conservatory of Istanbul, for example, it too, maybe he couldn't have been Yorgos Bagianos.
Yes.
So, in other words, on the one hand, we have academic studies of high level in the university, meaning we treat musicians, I mean, they should know how to read, and not only music, but anthropology and all the to study all the environment that they are placed in. But on the other hand, we also support the old way of education, as we mentioned before. The way that I also had as a kid, the oral way of learning, by listening, imitating, and filtering in your own way. Every student filters in his own way what he feels like. And until now, I think it's difficult to balance it, but I think the results are, we are optimistic that we are heading in the right direction by encouraging musicians to find their own personality in the music and not just imitate another, not just a copy, not one more copy of a great old musician. That's the motto.
Yeah, and maybe we see the results in the students that you taught, or maybe the students of the students. That will be an evidence if what you believe is right or wrong.
Yes, we still have the results, and it's optimistic. On the other hand, with this way, maybe you don't have many people playing in an average way. You just focus on the ones that you really want to encourage to do something more than the average. But then they will be the next generation mentors and teachers to support the vision for the future generations too.
Great, wonderful. Maybe it's the time now to deep dive into the Big Bang. I really love that model. I like it very much. Let's explain it to the audience, and please share the examples by playing on the lyre if possible. I really love the model, and I like the way you tell it like a story instead of going into the complications of having an evidence that this came before this, or we don't have any trace of this, therefore we shouldn't understand it. I see that you are doing links that are very convincing in bringing up the image of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will try to present it, and I mean, usually it's followed by diagrams. But anyway, I will try. Maybe it's a challenge for me.
Yeah.
Just the basics. So the idea started, as I mentioned before. I needed to find a way. I mean, firstly, I realized myself playing on the instrument and playing on an instrument which is a very old instrument, and it's not that easy to change the key, to transpose. So I play all the maqams in one key, like most musicians do, even on the oud. Also, I guess it's a new technique to try to make the changes. Anyway, on my instrument, every mode, every maqam has one place where it is played, and that's it. So, and so, firstly, I realized that all these modes are connected and should be treated one connected with the other, and not one by one without any connection between them. And then I realized that all these modes and maqams are based on a mother scale, on different notes, one after the other. They change the name and they change the scale, and that's a usual way which people did for thousands of years now, having the natural scale, call it natural, call it mother scale, and by changing, taking every note, a different note as a base note, creating another color. And then I don't remember where it started, but for example, there are some really complicated maqams that you really need many notes to explain what's going on. But on the other hand, all these maqams didn't exist all the time. They are new inventions of new musicians, like most of them have Arabic names, of course. And so the idea is to explain this music as if it was not a contemporary music, as if it doesn't exist today, and to start following the time backwards, or even better, I mean, that was the first idea, to go backwards and see how things were there. And also added to this, I can mention that this music was always, nobody came to break this music down, to demolish this music. Like in Europe, for example, people and musicians at some point decided they wanted to break the harmony and everything. Here, everything happened very smoothly. There was no big change since the medieval times, at least since the medieval times. So if this music is based in the medieval times, it cannot be that complicated as it looks. So going back to the medieval times, and of course with lots of reading of the old manuscripts, most of them originally written in Arabic, but unfortunately, I wish I could read Arabic. I love the sound, but anyway, I had to read all these books from the translations in French or later English. And by looking at the names, for example, you realize that there were changes into this music. For example, the word ushak was not always there, or which is used in the Turkish maqams nowadays. Or the word sabah was not always there. So going back, and since I was a kid, I was also a little bit into mathematics and physics, but very little. I don't remember many of them. Anyway, it felt to me like this movement of music. If you go backwards and you look in front, if you go to 0 or even to 3000 BC, and you go and you look in front, it looks, things are changing and moving. And the connection of music with the planets was also an ancient thing. So all this together arrived to the idea of trying to explain the creation of music in a parallel way, like the creation of the universe.
Yes.
In the Big Bang.
Yes.
It sounds like I am arrogant. Of course, the idea, and actually I have a theory about that. I mean, I have created a theory, and
Yes.
it is a theory, meaning that I cannot prove it's true. I guess nobody can prove it's wrong, but it's not about proving if it's true or wrong, but it's about thinking in a different way and understanding the modes that we play now, macams or Byzantine modes or anything, to understand how we have arrived at this situation. So,
and that the nature that the model makes you see things work. Really, you can learn and you see that it works. That's also a very evident thing that makes you have a trust with it.
yes, and I can verify that it works because I check it every year with the 20, 30 students of mine. Some of them come from other departments. They know only European music, or they know a few things about music, but still they like and they understand the basics, at least, of so the story briefly starts from the mother note, the first note ever appearing on Earth, and because now we talk about Earth, it's not about Middle East or Greece, Turkey, Mediterranean anymore, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting because it seems like on Earth, like we can still find stones that are, I don't know how many thousands years old, or meteorites, or even music that is very old exists on this planet. So I start from the Australian didgeridoo, which is an instrument that plays on one note, and then you can find examples of all around the world that from musical examples with 2 notes, 3 notes, that start building the basic, let's call it system. I call it before the natural scale or the mother scale. And then it's very interesting because even people that study complicated makams, they realize when I mention all that they have songs that they know very from their traditions, even if it's even European traditions or North African traditions or Middle Eastern traditions, that they're just 2 or 3 or 4 notes, and basically people sing on these notes. They don't need a complex octave or double octave to, like we are trained to with the makams.
Yeah.
So I don't want to speak longer about that, but so the basic mode that is created with this big band creation and one note after the other is the basic mode that almost more than 50% of the music from where you are and where I am is played. And this is named in different ways. It is the first mode for the Byzantine theory, the Ushak mode for the Turks, or the Bayati, I guess. I don't know if they're Bayati or other terminology for the Arabs.
Bayati.
So, right, thank you. And which is the notes, I mean, it's the mother scale. So if you go a note below, you find Rast. If you go a note above, you find Sigya, and then the Charga and these Iranian names. And what I encourage musicians to do is to start to take the time machine, go to 2000 BC before Christ, and I mean, let's say 4000 before, okay, our time, and and try to imagine if they were asked to play the sigya of the time with only these 4 frets, what would they do and how it would sound? So building slowly one step and then the other step, and slowly we arrive to complex makam systems, which are very, very new. Most of the complex makams are really they're not more than 250 years old, 300 years old maximum.
Yeah.
And there are many other things that work together with this, not only the knowledge, but also the feeling that when we play music, even when we improvise playing a taksim, it's not something that exists. It's not something for now. This is philosophical, but it's something that should start from the 0 point of the history and should arrive here, and ideally should move even further to the future. And I guess this is a very good description of what good music should sound like. Any good music, any really, no matter which area and which style. I mean, and so people also realize that what they do, it's not a taksim, let's say, of Makam Farah Faza. You correct me with the pronunciation.
Yeah, that's right.
That we do it in August 2020. It's something that is really deep, and if you grab that these roots, you can really make a more deep playing.
And that here comes the personality and the experience of the player, from practical perspective, theory perspective. That's execution, interpretation of the music he plays rather than he carries as is. How would it be, clear to the audience if we go on the instrument and show them the idea of these notes on a timeline where they have changed by time, where they have, brought up these relative distances or intervals between notes, and how that really, reflects into the inventions or the introductions of modes or modality.
I will try to do it, and with musical examples that they may not sound, they may sound strange or too primitive, but I may use examples that may look like Central African or something else. And then, of course, you will realize that a very important turn on this evolution of music is the creation of the pentatonic. So I will stay on the pentatonic a little bit because it is a universal language. And then from there, I will move to the modes that we mentioned, like the bayat or the ushak or the first mode.
Yeah, and I understand that the pentatonic came first. After one note, two notes, then pentatonic, and then we introduced, notes in between that are moving. This is the theory.
Exactly. Yes. So, starting from 0. That note has to be enriched with or embellished with something else below or above all the how do you say the ancient traditions that survive in Brazil or Africa. They never use faraway notes as a second note. They always use a step-by-step note, like and little by little there is this two notes created in the interval of a whole tone, which work as the legs or the basic columns of the system. The primary note and the note below. There is a song from Greece, for example, a carol that goes like that. And I guess many other examples around the world. Now this is another note. Again, it feels like Africa. And then, sorry, the fourth of the basic note. And the fifth. And now it's the pentatonic created, and now you may say it still sounds Africa, yes, but it sounds also China and Ireland and everywhere. Even here next to me, there are traditions with pentatonic. All the world, the globe has arrived to this pentatony. And then it's only a little step from pentatony to 7 notes in the scale by filling in these long intervals, where not any tradition did it. I mean, of course, the European tradition did it and the Middle Eastern tradition, but this is where it happened. And of course, now it has moved to all the other world. So. And here we talk about this cigar note, right? Which lots and lots of writing and arguments have arrived of what's the proper tuning, and congresses of musicologists. Well, I mean, proper tuning is where anybody wants it to be, because it is a note that arrives as in the pentatony, and there's gravity-wise, it can move up and down depending on the aesthetics of the musicians. So I try to play close to the Arabic tuning. I mean, I try. I'm used to tune this note a little higher, actually. But even, for example, in the North European music, they tune it as even higher. But it's the same music, which of course starts to have the different local characteristics, like we people have as physical characteristics, but we still are people who share the same DNA, right?
Yes.
So that's, I mean, the idea is about explaining the simplicity of things. This is where I focus. And then, of course, every makam needs, and every mode needs to be treated in a more analytical way.
Yeah.
But
maybe
always.
Tell me, Master.
Sorry, just to finish the line. Always taking the line from as far back as we can.
How we, for example, get to, for example, Rust, or let's take a recent example. Let's have an old example, like quickly demonstrate an old example. How can it be seen into the model of the Big Bang of Sokratis, and like a modern one. Let's have a modern makam and an old makam, just to see the beauty of the use of such a model.
Okay. I mean, all old makams really fit, because most of them fit on the natural mother scale. So this, if we call Rust, for example, we do nothing but just changing the note where we start from Bayati And if we start from Rust, of course, now you see now there's the need of the system to use more notes to expand there.
Yeah. Allah.
I try.
Yeah.
Now about the. Okay, let's talk about something that's also it's common in all these traditions. Hijaskar, for example, right?
Yeah.
It feels very far away. For example, I think you will agree. When people learn or teach Hijaskar, Rust is out of the question. Rust is something else, and Hijaskar is something else, right?
Sure.
But if you look at the what's the change? There's only a 2-note change. Only 2 notes are different. Of course, creating a different, as we call it, genre. In Rust, it is a diatonic, while in Hijaskar, it's chromatic, as we call it, right?
Yeah.
With semitones and a long step, a big step of 3 semitones. But these 2 changes of notes, according to my theory, must have happened at some point, and probably not both at the same time, but one by one. So, according to my theory, we start from the system as we know it. But now let's start from Rust, and let's play the whole octave. Not only for Rust, but for other old makams, it seems like that one of the first changes of frets that people experimented with was the change of the 6th note of the Rust, because it is also a strange note in terms of tuning, because can we name this note as Husseini? Is it okay, or you have another name?
No,
okay.
no, Husseini is good.
I talk about the.
In Arabic is the la, but we talk about for everybody here. So.
Okay. So I play C now. I play a B, but let's talk with it's a Husseini note, right?
Yeah.
The 6th of Rust. If you play it together with the Sigya note, it's a false 4th. It's a big 4th. So I don't know what was the reason, either to smooth the tuning or to really make a change. But people on the 5th of Rust, on Nava, they started lowering the Husseini notes, like. Which has many names. One of the old names is, as far as I know, Araban. I don't know if, please help me with your knowledge of the terminology. It's a Hijaz, actually, as a tetrachord on the 5th of Rust. Which is used as a change in many, many other makams of the basic makams. Even in Sigya, also in Bayati too, right?
Yeah.
So there is this change first. So in other words, if I wanted to learn Hijaskar, I would forget Hijaskar and start playing all these makams who have this Hijaz color on the 5th of Rust.
Yes.
Combine Rust with this combination it's known as Suzinak too.
Right.
Well, but after playing, and playing, Suzinak itself has in its notes a, a combination of notes which doesn't sound correct. I talk about the Duga note and this lowered Husseini note. So somebody sometime felt like, okay, let's make a perfect fifth between this lowered Husseini and let's lower now the basic note. That was my first note, right? The Dugia note. So all together now, and it's very interesting because Hijaskar, it is a very new makam actually.
Yes.
It's much newer, very much later than Hijaz arrived. It's an invention of the musicians of the period, and I mean, according musician or the musicians who arrived to this new note there. Maybe it was a new fret for them. And one of them played it. Ooh, and they were so thrilled. And the other said, we should name it somehow. And the third one said, guys, it sounds like Hijaz, but it's not Hijaz because Hijaz is placed a whole tone over that, right? They know that Hijaz is there. That's the Hijaz with a whole tone. But now it is, let's call it Hijazkar, which is, I mean, the outcome of Hijaz, right? The earning of Hijaz. So I make a little, because I speak too much, but I make a little taksim improvisation from Rast to Hijazkar, which is, I'm sure for most musicians, something that there's no useless or too far away maybe to think of. But before I go, I will start with the first lines of the SMI of Tamburici Emil Bey on Hijazkar, where from the beginning, the first passage is a passage on Rast in the base of the melody. So I try to remember it. It goes. You see, it's a pure Rast. So even Tamburici Emil Bey, with I don't know if he did it on purpose or not, but he's telling the story of the makam. So I play from Rast.
So
Yeah,
beautiful,
nice.
so beautiful.
Yeah,
It's really, I think we gave a very good exposure to such a model, and maybe you tell me if the all the musicians who learned in a different way other than the standardized fashion, maybe they knew it, right? Based on their,
yes.
yeah,
This is very correct.
yeah,
Yes, even unconsciously they could treat it that way.
mm,
They had the connection of the Makams,
mm,
and I guess the main reason is that they played in an environment
mm,
that they didn't change the keys. They didn't have so many keys.
mm,
We now, I mean, most musicians have to play with other instruments that are tuned in a different key, and of course, singers
mm,
mainly that ask for strange keys,
mm,
strange tonalities,
mm,
and of course, the arrival of instruments that are really sophisticated and can do more, like
mm,
the violin or the clarinet, or what else, or the cello.
mm.
So changing all the time the tonalities and the keys, I believe throws you far away from the to understand all the system, all the makams connected
Mm.
in place and in time.
Mm. And maybe also learning from other theorists where they put music in a certain form. So we go and then try to adapt it to another language or another kind of music. Maybe that's another impact.
This is very, very true too,
Mm.
because music, I mean, if you have somebody who knows and go step by step,
Mm.
I mean, it's easy to follow.
Mm.
It's something that we still haven't found a way,
Mm.
people haven't found a way to write it down in books.
Hopefully
Since the
soon.
time of, yes, but
Yeah,
since the time of Al-Farabi, I don't know if I name it correctly,
that's right.
it was it
Mm.
was all about numbers and only numbers, but it's not about the music is not there. So still
Mm.
we need each other live, and we need the masters
Mm.
to learn from them. And this is great, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And I think this model encourages people to break the barriers they put around themselves and try to see things in a fresh way, asking the questions, trying to understand the music for themselves, for their composition, for their understanding. It's encouraging for people to understand, and it explains the maqams, maybe what we see in other kind of theories in maqam, like sayr, the pentachords or tetrachords fashion. We have here all alternative things to utilize for a simplified version of it, or maybe a different alternative version of it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, I also noticed that in your Takseems, you go always to Ushak and then you move to different kinds of journeys during the Takseems. Is that a norm that you do, or maybe a certain kind of musicians used to do?
No, not really.
Hmm.
And I don't know. Maybe I overdid it in our meetings,
Hmm. Yeah.
playing on Ushak or Bayati. But
Hmm.
it's true that
Hmm.
it is the main conjunction there. It is the if it was a village, it would be the central square
Hmm.
where all other roads meet.
Hmm.
So it's an important place where also other secondary makams at some point of the history
Hmm.
would choose to end
Hmm.
on, which is, of course, according to the Big Bang Theory, it
Yeah.
is where everything started from.
Yeah.
So metaphorically, it's interesting that it goes back to the beginning, but
Exactly.
not really. I
Hmm.
mean, if I depending on the no, you know, this is a very another story.
Hmm.
I mean, how you know what? To be honest, I don't play Taksims so often.
Hmm.
I mean, because I don't play with. lately with musicians in a specific context of tradition. The closer I get to traditions is when I play with Deria Trucan I mentioned before.
Yeah.
But still, we play taxi. I mean, it's not a taximin. It's more an improvisation where we explore other sounds. Still, the makam is there, but we treat it in a more free, liberated way.
Big bangish.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
To the future, Big Bangish. I mean,
Yes.
to uncharted places.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, what I love in the small circles or in concerts when it's needed to play a taksim with its rules, its form, and there I play what I have to play. I mean, if it's Hijaskar, I play Hijaskar. I won't start with Rast, for example, or I won't start from Ushak or Bayati if it's something else.
Yes. And it's the Big Bang where, we have that mother system and the timeline system, let's say, where Oshak is expanding down and up with those moving notes where we can bring everything like you have excellently presented. And one thing that I remember is amazing that the reciters of the Quran, which is a very excellent tradition in Egypt especially, where all of them start with Ushak, Bayati. And then they travel and they take the trip to anywhere. So
I will use them
yes.
as an example of my theory too. Great.
Yeah, so this is really interesting and amazing. Thank you very much for giving a very good brief about it. And I encourage people really to beg Socrates to go ahead and document this in one way or another, in a modern way. It doesn't have to be a written format, where people really can utilize, especially musicians, to learn and play and produce and compose. And I really congratulate you for such a great model.
Thank you so much. And now, actually, you give me an idea. You are right. I mean, right, handwriting and books is almost, unfortunately, belongs to another era. Maybe I should work on videos on YouTube. What do you think?
Yes, let's depart what Al-Farabi used to do, Ormawi and all of these guys. We like them, but we need to say it in our way today.
Okay. Maybe you changed my life now. Really, thank you.
Great. So yes. So my question is, do you find this model after experiencing it on students, for yourself, for the believers of this model, did you see any weakness that it could not convince you to explain a certain type of genre of music, or a certain practice of taksim, or a certain practice of flavor of music?
Not so far, really. I think I have tested it for several seasons. It's there for the basics. I mean, what I want to repeat is that it's not a theory. It's not the invention of the century. I know but it is something to help people. So it is actually what I name it as a educational tool to support the education and the understanding of the modality, especially for those who are not deep into this music. Because as you mentioned before, like all musicians, even the contemporary musicians, those who play the music, I mean, they should maybe they also can find another way of thinking, but they know all these things. So it's about students and musicians from other traditions that they really want to get deeper into the understanding of the modes of the East.
That's actually like all of them reach to the same conclusions. You see Jamil Bey or whoever, and you see maybe you demonstrated several times the use of some folk music or some traditional music or maqam music that really reflects such understanding of maqam. So they just reach the same conclusion, which means we have a working model.
Exactly. And now that you mentioned it, We usually neglect folk music, but folk music was there before the scholars came and cultivated and created all these traditions of the makam, not only of Istanbul, of Kahira and in many other places, right?
Yes.
In Iraq too, in Saudi too. So the folk music was there, and the material was there in a minimalistic way, and it's still there.
Yeah.
And if we treat it as one, we can. I mean, we need to connect the puzzle. In other words, we in no way we should act like the musicians in Greece and elsewhere we talked about before, like 40 years ago, that they were everyone was locked in his room, thinking that that's the universe. Unfortunately, you're only seeing a very small part of it, and to get the whole idea, you need to look around.
Wonderful. Yeah. So this brings us to the question of the modern artist, the musician. I mean, how to build musicianship and build a unique character and have a product of value today.
Nice question. I think at least still everywhere musicians are start as students learning something, an instrument, usually, or a voice of a specific tradition. European music is everywhere, and this is what most people learn, but you have all the local traditions. Usually, these local traditions are very, very interesting everywhere on the planet. Where you live, where I live, everywhere. But usually, too, these local traditions are accompanied with several other thoughts and ideas that have nothing to do with music and have to do with the local culture and sometimes with nationalism. And this is, I mean, the words like, this is our music, we should play this music. So I went through this too. And I remember a big change arrived in my life when I asked myself, what music do you like? Because I used to play all, but do you really like the music you play? And if the answer was yes, let's talk about Greek folk music, right? The question would be, do you like the music that you play? Yes, of course, is the answer. But then, do you like everything of the repertoire that I was trained at the time, that every singer asks you to play? And the answer was no. I mean, I had some tunes and some songs that I liked, and some others that I didn't like. But I was kind of obliged to play them because it was our repertoire. So I guess I'm not the only one, and many people have been through this, and maybe some of them didn't ever ask the question if they like the music. So, I mean, you understand? So most of us, because the other people like what we do, we think that we like it too. And we become, in other words, a very important tool for the society or for the little micro society of a village or a town, but maybe we have not found ourselves in there. So I believe the most important question for a musician who wants to be living in his time and being well with himself is to really, after his training, to ask himself what he really, how to find a place to feel nice and comfortable with music.
And what kind of contribution he would like to do, right?
Of course, yes. For example, in my case, what I do many things. I still continue to do many things. But what I do, in one word, it would be experimental music. That's what we do. I mean, it's nothing. I don't play the tradition of the instrument, at least in public, in big concerts. And we have moved forward. Even when we try to play the traditions, something else arrives, which is not the typical playing or taksim of the 1950s already or later.
Yeah.
If you ask me, I don't know what I will do in 10 years. I really don't know, because I now feel nice with this. I still feel very connected with the traditions. They feel like it is our mother, the traditions, and which is really, and it's always there for us to go back. And I usually do it when I'm alone most of the times, to go back and open my notes here and play some old repertoire and make a taksim after listening to Nikolaik's compositions or recordings of Aleko Bajanos and Tamburice Milbey, for example.
Yeah. Yes. When you say experimental music, this terminology or jargon, let's say, has been spread around, and people claim creativity and innovation with this term. And I don't know, I mean, where do we know the real experimentation versus the commercial sort of it?
You're right.
Yeah.
And then, at least for the European circle of musicians, experimental music is almost noise. I mean, it's something beyond music. No, I just used the term in a very personal way. It's experimental for me, meaning that I start from where I start, and the steps I take feel to me experimental music, even though it would sound something being in the Makam
family
world. Yes, so it's not. Maybe that the term experimental is not the correct one, but anyway, I mean combinations of musicians and.
We call it a sort of research, a sort of.
That's the word. Call it research. Yes.
Yeah, much better.
That's it.
Yeah. And how do you see the thin line between being so open versus identity versus localization?
Personally, I feel I have taken the right path. I'm 46 years old now, and I recorded an album under my name 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Since then, I overdo it. I started. What I want to say with this is that I took my time and I really was devoted to musicians who were deep into the roots. For example, I used to play with a Greek researcher and singer. She passed away now, also 8 years ago, 7 years ago. Domna Samiou, who was one of the main fingers of the Greek folk music. So I used to play with her, being kind of her orchestra director and helping her with everything for almost 20 years, with a very intense programs of recording and playing concerts. So I took my time, and I feel I have digested very well all this music. And although it's not recognizable for everyone, for me, all the efforts that I have tried to create music, I feel they're very much connected with all the folk music of the area, which is, of course, in a wider sense, it's the music of a wider area of the Mediterranean Balkans.
Great. Let's discuss some of the activities that you do in terms of music production, concerts, records, collaborations with other artists. And what are these objectives, or do they have a common objective, or?
The common objective is to to feel good with the people you work with, and to feel that the music you do makes you a better musician and a better man. And of course, the others share the same feelings. And as a last step, the audience also receives it the way you expect to have it received. So the projects that I work on for the last years, of course, we are in a pause because of the virus. Nevertheless, we had a concert 2 days ago. That was nice with my quartet. So the quartet that I created 6-7 years ago is the main project. It's a quartet having my lira as the leading instrument, accompanied by a piano player, a double bass player, and a hybrid drummer who plays hand drums and a little drum set. So in there we play my compositions, which are very much influenced by, as we talked before, from the folk music of the area, from all the musics I have played, even from the classical music of Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean. Of course, but it's also this music is we use elements of classical music too, like polyphony, 2 or 3 lines at a time, and also jazz, at least in the improvisations. We try to break our limits, and I think the improvised parts with this group is something that I really live for. The compositions are there just to make the engine starting, and then we go for, and this is really experimental sometimes. I mean, this is really, we go for the noise and the completely free playing. On the other hand, we have this duo with Derya Turkan, playing the two of us with a small orchestra, with qanun and oud and percussion, or playing just the two of us. There we play the old repertoire, the common repertoire of the folk music of Istanbul, and of course some excerpts, some parts of the classical repertoire or the Mevlevi Dervish repertoire, as a start again to improvise and to have a dialogue. So again, it's all about the taksim and the improvisation between us. And then there's another project going on with a cellist, Jean-Guyen Queiras, who lives in France. In Germany, he's a French cellist. He's one of the very, very top classical cellists. He's playing all around the world. And there it's him and me with our two bows coming from 2 different worlds. And with two percussionists who are Iranian origin French percussionists, Bijan and Keyvan Shemirani. This is again something very interesting because we play compositions from several regions and we meet during the improvisations again. And well, that's it. And several other projects, smaller, with musicians that I love. Most of them live here in Greece, in smaller bands, small concerts, with more direction to play folk music or folk songs with singers here.
Wonderful. Where do we find your work? Do we look into music stores or YouTube, or there is a website that has links to all of these activities and projects?
Yes, well, music stores are really I don't know, they're having very hard times since many years. But yes, at least for the quartet, which is under my name, the Sokratis Sinopoulos Quartet, this is, we have recorded for ECM Records, so there are 2 albums there. One of the first is called 8 Winds and the other Metamodal. And on Spotify there are all the albums for somebody to listen to. And on YouTube, not really. On YouTube there are several live recordings. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. There are some things, but not the whole albums. Everything is on Spotify, and the recordings with Derya Turkan too.
Yeah.
That are there.
They are beautiful. And any other place, like some Greek website or some kind of place where you easily reach to your works, basically?
Well, now you got me because you are into it. No, but like I told you before, you changed my life. So give me a couple of months, and I
Yes.
will get back to you with that.
Great. This is beautiful. Thank you very much. Now, anything to declare, like it's being cooked by you, Sokratis? Any sort of project that's new or some?
Okay, I mentioned it already. Unfortunately, I mean, because it's new, it's very new. Although it's based on an old friendship of me and Derya Turkan. But I'm very happy because in October we will have a duet album, just the two liras and venture, naked and very, very well connected in a dialogue. I really love this album, and I love, in a production, you have good music and good players, but you also need a good production, and then sound is very important. So we are very lucky because we recorded with a great sound engineer, Manuel. I don't remember his surname, but he has recorded many, many great musicians in Europe. And so I'm very happy for this recording because it's really a step forward to this friendship with Derya, and I believe to the music too, and of course for the instrument, because we play both the same instrument coming from two different ways and traditions nowadays.
Yeah, I think it's due to discuss the friendship with Dirya, because really I love the way you guys play together on albums and live concerts, and it's really challenging to have the same instrument, same level of tuning with two masters playing at the same time. Maybe
Yes,
let's talk
yes.
about this.
I mean, people would say, don't do it.
Yeah.
Nobody did it. Nobody really did it. But it's very interesting because if nobody ever recorded, and not only the liras or kemençe, even the ouds or the kanun in the old recordings. Let's forget the orchestras, the modern orchestras everywhere that are based on the stereotype of the European orchestra, which is, I think, it's not the right direction.
Yeah.
Anyway, in terms of real music, there was never a double. But if we go back and check photographs of all these guys in Istanbul and everywhere that they played in the tavernas we mentioned before, they doubled the instruments. The reason is obvious. They had no microphones, and they just actually the double of the instruments. That's the reason that they doubled and tripled and quadrupled the instruments, because they wanted to play in big theaters. This is how the orchestras were created in Europe. They just needed more to multiply the sounds, right? So even in folk traditions, at least, I mean, I take as a basis the lyra as an instrument. In Crete, in northern Greece, it was very common for people to play together, even if they didn't play the same lines. So the result was some very interesting resonances sometimes.
Heterophonic, yeah.
Yes, heterophonic, exactly. So, I mean, it's on the one hand, we do something new, which is not new, but the way we do it, of course, making together improvisations in parallel and moving, having a complex dialogue, this is something which is challenging in any way, because we talk about the same instrument.
Yeah.
But I think it's not about the instrument anymore. It's about the people and about the personalities. We feel so relaxed when we are together. like it's the same, like we are in one body. So I'm very happy for this recording. So
Yeah.
this is the plan for the near future, and I hope that we will have the chance to have concerts, and of course we work on other ideas about recordings too.
Great. And you keep challenging each other during these performances.
And yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's the beauty of teasing, during the live performance. Yeah.
exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So, what's the title of such work? Is there a title? Is it the third album?
Yes. And the title is, it's an English edition, so it's all in English with some little Greek and Turkish in the booklet. And we, the idea is that we make a virtual journey. So we have a song, for example, from the island of Mytilene, which is near Turkey. So Mytilene is one place. And then Istanbul, of course. And then all the places we move are Greece and Turkey, right? And then Konya, where we play a little part of the dervish tune, Mevlevi Dervish. And then, let me think, it's it's again in Turkey, in northern Turkey, west of Istanbul. And as a last stop, it's Belgium, where we played and where we created a composition on the spot. So every track has a name of a place, like Istanbul, Konya, Mytilene, Fernemond. This is the place, the village in Belgium, and all the album is called Music Places, in one word, Music Places, which is about these places, but basically it is about the music places in us and how we combine them with the area.
Great. Looking forward to it, actually. Sokratis, I am really, really enjoying this conversation. And we tell the audience that we will meet again for a lot of things to discuss with our guest here. However, before we leave, let's maybe share some of the music of your playing and maybe describe each of them. Let's pick three.
Let's start. This is my first recording. I was maybe 18, 19, I don't remember. And it was a series of CDs at the time on folk instruments. So it's a CD on the lira where three people will share it with other two musicians. I mean, it's three-part CD. The first part is the politiki lira, myself, accompanied with two musicians. The second part is the Cretan lira, and the third part is the Pondic lira. Let's listen to a Hijaz Taksim. From that time, I always like that recording because it reminds me of that time. Maybe in terms of a right Hijaz Taksim, I would think of other things now, but it's a nice Taksim.
Yeah.
So let's listen to that.
Okay, we listen to it. All right. What would be the second selection? What would you pick?
Okay, that's a nice story. When I was a teenager, and when after I met Ross Daly, he got me into the tradition, the Eastern traditions. I started playing semais, the form of
Yeah.
this instrumental form, which is common in all the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East.
Yes.
And as an exercise, I started composing tunes on semais on different makams. It was more like an exercise to me rather than a composition. And one of the first semais I composed was a semai on makam Niavent. I must have been 17 years old or 18, somewhere around. And I remember I liked it. And at that time, I was practicing all this repertoire in a group where there was another musician. I cannot tell the names, you know. And he was very strict with the makams, and it's very. I mean, he was the completely opposite of the big band.
Yeah.
The idea of himself about the music was the big frozen world, that everything has to be like it was, right? So I presented the semai, and I remember he yelled at me, no, and about a technical thing, that the semai shouldn't use this Bayati idea so soon at the first line, you know.
Yeah.
But I felt so bad, you know, and that's one of the reasons that I didn't go on with the composing. But anyway, that was sad. But from that time, there is still this composition that I kept on playing, and I feel very nice now. I see people and students here in Greece and in Turkey and musicians that they play this semai, and I hope one day that it gets into the repertoire. That would be my dream.
Yeah.
So
it's popular now. It's popular, and we look forward for more compositions, samais and non-samais.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's listen to it.
Okay, let's listen to it. Great. What would be the last pick?
So
You are so generous with the audience.
Sorry, I forgot what was that. Sorry, Fadil.
What was the last pick?
Yes.
The last
sorry,
example.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Tell me when to start.
Yeah, you can carry on.
So the last one is one of my favorite tunes. And actually, it is one of the tunes we recorded with Deria. It will be in the upcoming album. But here is another version that I play. It's not from an album, actually. It's a recording from a private. I don't remember where it is from. I just stepped on it on YouTube, and it is a recording of a song from the island of Mytilene. It's very interesting because it is the last piece. It is connected with everything we said because it is also based on the, let's call it, Bayati mode, but treated in a more with this second note. It's not treated that low as we said before. It's a more high tune, but basically it is again one example of the basic modes that the muezzins in Egypt will start their Quran, right? Or the Big Bang starts from. So that's it. The name is Anathema Tonetio anyway. It's a love song actually. Yes.
Wonderful. Let's listen to it. Okay, Sokratis, really, this is a very amazing discussion we had here. We really enjoyed a great time, and I really thank you for this. I would leave the ending of this episode to you.
I thank you very much too, and I'm honored that the first episode in English we did it together, and I wish many more even more interesting episodes, more and more interesting, and I hope we get back soon.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you soon then.
Something else. Thank you. Bye bye.
وإلى لقاء قريب وحلقات جديدة من بودكاست النادي.